In this message, I want to deal with the Great Reset, Part 3, the rise of a world socialist state. I believe this is my most important part here. The two previous sections were only laying the foundation for what I'm about to say here in this third part. The World Economic Forum, the Fourth Industrial Revolution, and the Great Reset have already been dealt with, but I want to go further here in talking about the rise of socialism across the Western world. At Davos in Switzerland in January 2020, just at the beginning of this year, President Trump spoke for 30 minutes on the success of capitalism within America. At that great convention, he was surrounded by very powerful men and influences that were utterly opposed to everything that he was saying. But he made a stand for capitalism, for freedom, and for free enterprise. Now, this isn't a political video, but I want to show you what is happening in our world. We have watched for 4 years an unprecedented opposition to a man filling that office of the presidency. The media all joined together week by week for 4 years to attack that man, even from within the FBI and the CIA, even the leadership of the EU, the UN, the World Economic Forum, WHO, NATO, and many other groups, world businessmen, all united together with one voice for 4 years. That does draw my attention. President Trump has proved himself to be pro-Israel, pro-life, pro-evangelical Christians, pro-the nation state, but anti-globalist. He is a true capitalist in the true sense of the word. What is a capitalist? You look back to Thatcher in Britain and Reagan in America, and you see true capitalism. Capitalism is what has made the Western world, from Australia all the way through to Great Britain. This is what has undergirded it, a freedom and a liberty of conscience and of religion. Now, we are going to look at socialism, Marxism, and communism in part in this video. But I want you to understand these three systems are all economic systems. They are financial systems. So is capitalism. All of these ideologies present a certain economic system that affects the whole political strata of life. Now, we are Christians. And a real Christian, a real church, can function and operate under any type of government, whether it's a federalist, Republican, Democratic, or a communist government. We can operate, and none of that should affect us. Of course, there are consequences, but we are the Church of Jesus Christ. So in saying what I'm saying in this message, please understand, as I present these ideologies, we, the church, can operate in any nation, under any government. Whether we suffer or have great freedom, we are still to be the Church of Jesus Christ. Just since my last video, we look at what's been happening in the nations around us. The Bank of England just 2 weeks ago created £150 billion at the press of a button. It was created by the central bank to try and stem off the financial crisis that is staring us in the face. We have watched all across London, businesses close, as well as right across our world. As we entered a second lockdown, in London, on the very first night, there were massive demonstrations and protests of normal people taken to the streets. The police turned out in force and responded with great force against them. Just a couple of months ago, we seen the same police force even taking the knee at BLM events. And yet the media was silent about mass demonstrations in London, Berlin, in Italy, in Spain, in other nations of the world. They're very silent, and yet world media greatly promoted the BLM. I could go on to tell you many of the things that are happening in our world, but I'm giving you the context of what is happening. I believe we're in the midst of the rise of world socialism once again, and here in this message, let me prove it. The World Economic Forum website posted an article in this year in July 2020, and let me quote, "The Great Reset must place social justice at its center." It goes on further to speak about capitalism as we know it must be reformed. Quote, "In the post-COVID-19 world, there are 3 features that will need to be fully institutionalized as a part of the new local and global social contract." He then gives 3 points here, the World Economic Forum, of how they are going to implement the Great Reset. Listen to what point number 1 is, and I'm quoting here. "Capitalism and socialism will need to merge together." He goes on further. "The slow death of capitalism does not equate to a resurgence of communism. However, rethinking capitalism or giving capitalism a great reset means that capitalism and socialism will need to merge to create a productive and inclusive economic and social model. Wealth has become abundant thanks to capitalism, but it now needs to be more broadly distributed, as socialists have long called for." So we see here the World Economic Forum is saying the Great Reset. What does it mean? It is the merger of capitalism and socialism. Capitalism has to change. It's coming to the end of its life. That's what they're predicting. In a World Economic Forum video on YouTube in June 2020, listen to what it was titled, "Why We Need to Rethink Capitalism." In that video, they're pressing the button on the world order and resetting it. Klaus Schwab, the founder of the World Economic Forum, who we've dealt with in these videos, in an article by him in Time magazine released on the 22nd of October, just before the election, it was titled this, all about the Great Reset. "A better economy is possible, but we need to reimagine capitalism to do it." Do you see what's happening here? The Great Reset, the 4th World Industrial Revolution, all that's happening at the minute is to change capitalism. And yet that is what has made our Western world. We have had a response over the past week from the world media, realizing that we're exposing these things. The New York Times 7 days ago wrote up an article saying that the Great Reset was a baseless conspiracy theory, and that people like me are spreading misinformation. What is very interesting, as they released that article, one of their own columnists from the New York Times was sitting on special lectures and talks about the Great Reset held by the World Economic Forum on the same day. You couldn't write this if you tried. Honestly, this is the truth. BBC also 4 days ago began to mock and make fun of those that see a conspiracy held within the Great Reset. Do you realize what I've just read you? That the World Economic Forum is saying that there's going to come a change of the economy. We need to change it at this time. And we're going to have to merge socialism, thought up the brainchild, and we'll come to it, what is at the back of it. But I want to show you, over the past week, many media news outlets are attacking this as a conspiracy theory. Just one of my videos released 6 days ago already has 66,000 watches on it in less than 1 week. I assure you, people are beginning to go, what is going on here? When I done my first video, very few of you knew what the Great Reset was. And there's many people now in many areas beginning to point it out over the past months and to expose what's wrong. Here in this short video, I want to deal with 3 statements and explain what they mean. In Klaus Schwab's book, And here is a front cover: COVID-19, The Great Reset by Klaus Schwab, the founder of the World Economic Forum. I've read this book over the recent past month. He published this in June time. And this book holds within it all the information of how they want to merge socialism and capitalism and create a new worldwide economic system. I believe this is the new rise of a socialist world government state. I believe this is the beginning of it. And things will not draw back until they have accomplished their plan. In his book, he makes 3 statements that I want to pinpoint and show you here. And as I reveal them to you, you're going to see the most prominent people in politics in our world are using these actual statements. And I want to warn you in this video, this is bigger than economics. As they talk about an economic change, they're really talking about the change from capitalism to socialism that will one day end up in something similar to communism. What are my 3 statements that are presented in this book by Schwab? Listen carefully. Build back better. Second of all, shareholder capitalism. And third of all, the social contract. I'm going to explain these words that most of us normally would never even consider or understand, but I've made it my job to understand them in what is about to happen. And these 3 terms are vital to understand how they're trying to create a global socialist state. This is it, my friends. If you know Bible prophecy, I believe we're at the beginning of so much of Bible prophecy coming very quick to pass. Now, what is this build back better? Let's start with this build back better. You have all heard it by now, I am sure. What is the Build Back Better plan specifically? This term was only really used widely by the World Economic Forum in the context of the Great Reset material. That's where it originated. That's where it had its source and beginning. It was used very often by them in their headlines to articles about what they were going to do. Build back better. And going back to the year 2016, 4 years ago, the World Economic Forum has constantly been using this to prepare for the Great Reset. The World Economic Forum in July of this year, 2020, released one article. Listen to what it was called. To build back better, we must reinvent capitalism. Here's how. In their article on their own website, and you can find the link to it below here. But in that article, they're saying build back better is the reinvention of capitalism. And they're going to tell you how they're going to do it. It's an entire green agenda within it. And governments are beginning to step in line with it and repeat the motto of build back better. It is a code word, it is a phrase, and it is a slogan. You Americans obviously know that Joe Biden began in July to use the term build back better. It became his platform motto to stand against Trump in the next election. Also, Boris Johnson first mentioned build back better in May. Now, since September, right through until the past week, he is constantly talking about build back better. This is becoming a dominant theme amongst world governments, political leaders in the Western world, and it's no accident. Back in May, a few months ago, the UN began to use it. The World Bank began to use it. In April, the month before that, Greenpeace, the Friends of the Earth, and the Joint Council of the Welfare of Immigrants launched a new joint campaign called, guess what? Build Back Better. Over recent weeks and the past month, the governments of Canada, New Zealand, Scotland have all used Build Back Better. The WHO, the IMF, the EU, the Rockefeller Foundation, MasterCard, BP, the World Bankers and central banks are all using Build Back better. How could this be possible that right in the midst of this crisis, that all of these key institutions and political leaders are rising up and saying, we have a plan, build back better. You know why? Because they're working according to a plan. And I believe the plan is held within the Great Reset and what's been presented by the World Economic Forum for a few years. You see, they're talking about rebuilding the economy, about a new normal, that we'll never go back to what was before. That's what it means by this term. We're not going back. We're going to create a whole new system of politics, economics, and of social life. And we'll deal more with that in part 4 that will come very shortly. They're going to redesign a better world by reinventing capitalism and bringing in the rise of socialism, which was anathema. When I first heard about this rise of socialism, I didn't believe it. I thought nobody could be that foolish. No way could this socialism and communism become popular again. But oh, how wrong I was. It is a dominant influence in this hour. Even in Great Britain, Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister of Great Britain, going back to just 1 year, to December 2019, he actually confirmed and put it out publicly that he would not attend Davos 2020. He spoke against it. In fact, he told all of his cabinet members that they should be busy delivering on the election promises concerning Brexit rather than sipping champagne with billionaires. That's what he thought about Davos. Brexit was to be the focus. What is Brexit? Bringing Great Britain out of the EU. In the EU, they lost their liberties, their freedoms, many legal rights. And Europe, an unelected federal government, began to affect the law of Great Britain. Well, Brexit is the way out. This has been on for 4 years now. Brexit has dominated the headlines. The British people rose up and said, we don't want to be part of the EU. We want our freedoms and our liberties back. Well, Boris was all for this, and this is why he got elected. He spoke against Davos, spoke against union with the EU. In fact, he criticized Davos for the previous 6 years before to the present year. For 6 years, he's criticized this system and its gathering. You know, he used to go there every year to it, so he knew what he was speaking about. But something has happened over recent months. Boris Johnson has begun to promote the new Green Deal, promising a green industrial revolution, all under the auspices of Build Back Better. He is turning the nation green in 1 single year. He actually says that Britain will become the world leader of the green agenda. He's talking all about green jobs, green social life, green homes, green cities, and 1,000 other things. He has now proposed just 2 weeks ago that diesel and petrol cars will be banned, cannot be sold in Britain by the year 2030. It's not me saying it. It's not a conspiracy. It's public. Go and look at the news items. Friends, I'm telling you of an economic change that's going to bring a change politically right across our world, and the loss of freedoms that we hold dear. Boris also said that London would become the centre of the global green financial system. And that's why he is changing it. He wants to be at the front of this. Just 2 weeks ago, less than 2 weeks ago, Boris met with Bill Gates and other big pharma CEOs in order to discuss about vaccines and the way ahead to handle COVID-19. Do you see how these men have been hijacked? They were against all of this, but suddenly they've been brought in on something. It's no wonder that Boris Johnson has been caught up in this. Matt Hancock, who is his Secretary of State for Health and Social Care in Great Britain, has been involved in the fourth industrial revolution for many years. He's actually got articles on the British government website on the fourth industrial revolution. It is official that on the government website on the 16th of October 2017 that his entire speech that he gave at Davos is on there. You see, Hancock is a big promoter of the Great Reset, the fourth industrial revolution, and this coming social change that's to affect the British Isles. Now, Hancock referenced Schwab in his speech. Listen to what he says about Schwab, the founder of the World Economic Forum. He has informed us what we are to do, that we are to play a leading part as far as technology in this. Everything must be digitalized. When he spoke at Davos in 2018, this was his title, Reimagining Policy Making for the Fourth Industrial Revolution. Something's happening with the British government at this time. They have been caught up in this when in fact they began and got elected to come out of Europe and away from the loss of sovereignty. Suddenly they are losing the vision of Brexit and are becoming a pro-reset institution. Boris Johnson recently said it's not enough to go back to the same that we had. He said COVID is the trigger for the economic and social change of our nation. That's the first statement. Build back better. Let me go to a second one. You Americans, hold on. I'm coming to you shortly. The second statement is shareholder capitalism as opposed to stakeholder capitalism. When someone talks about capitalism, you think, and I think, that they mean the same as us. Capitalism is capitalism. But look what Klaus Schwab in his book is beginning to talk about shareholder capitalism, different from stakeholder capitalism. These aren't terms we normally use. They are using these terms knowing that we don't understand these terms. We hear the word capitalism and we think it means the capitalism of freedom and liberty. But you know what? Klaus Schwab is talking about a radical new start when he talks about shareholder capitalism. Next year, in April 2021, to coincide with Davos in April 2021, that's going to be next year, all about the Great Reset. He's releasing a new book. This is his last book, but he's going to release a new book. Listen to what the title is. How Capitalism Works and How We Can Overcome It. That's the leader of the World Economic Forum. He's going to put a book out to go side by side with the Great Reset gathering at Davos next year. And as he does that, the whole underpinning theme is, how do we overcome capitalism? Have I got your attention in this video? Sadly, I can't say all that I need to say in this. You see, they're talking about to shape the Great Reset at the gather next year. They're going to rebuild a more cohesive and sustainable society. They're going to design a common unified recovery path. They are going to call on all world governments to join together behind this plan. I'm talking about shareholder capitalism. He's going to release his book on it next year. Now let me just move on to my American friends, to Joe Biden. Listen to what he says. At one of his campaigns, election campaigns, in July this year, on the 9th of July, at the platform where he had written, Build Back Better. That was his main headline. That was his platform message. Biden said, listen to what he said in his speech on the 9th of July. We need to end the era of shareholder capitalism. You see, he's talking, like with the World Economic Forum, moving from shareholder capitalism and moving on to stakeholder capitalism. Now, you might say, what does this mean? I'm going to explain it to you very simply. Shareholder capitalism means it benefits the owners. It's true capitalism. That's what shareholder capitalism is. It's true capitalism that we understand and recognize. It benefits the owners. It's about competition. It's about working hard. It is the current economic system across the Western world. But you know what Biden and Schwab want to do? And they've said it publicly. They want to move away from that to stakeholder capitalism. They still use the word capitalism as an economic political term. And yet they said there's going to be a change coming and it's going to happen in the Great Reset. We'll still call it capitalism, but it will no longer be shareholder that we understand capitalism to be. It's going to be stakeholder. What is stakeholder? It is collective. Everybody owns it. It is the collective ownership of property and a business, of sale, of making money, and of the redistribution of wealth. Do you know what that is? That is socialism. That is old-fashioned socialism. But now they've given a new title to socialism. They call it stakeholder capitalism. Do you know why they call it that? Because most of us would say, I don't want socialism. But they're presenting a new economic system. They're going to change it in the Great Reset. And they're moving from a capitalist system to a socialist system, but they're going to call it all capitalist. That's what they're going to do. You see, they're saying that stakeholder capitalism is nice business etiquette. They say we're thinking about everybody. But you can be sure the great businesses of our world aren't going to distribute their wealth to people like you and me. They most certainly are not going to do that. When they talk about the redistribution of wealth, or they talk about stakeholder capitalism and businesses, you know what they're talking about? More government control and influence upon it. The collective management will be state management, and the state will decide how to use that. In other words, the state's going to move into the economy, into the business world, and begin to gain the influence away from the small businessman, and now state governments and systems like the World Economic will have more influence. You see, Biden has made a stand for the Great Reset of capitalism. He said that he's looking for a more equitable redistribution of global resources. End of quote. In other words, what he's saying is less freedom and less money, more tax, higher tax, and less freedom. A radical and dramatic change in how we run our lives. Look at the Democratic Party in America, and I'm not speaking politics here. I'm telling you the Church of Jesus Christ, what's going to happen in our world to set us up for the last days, and we must play our part in this. We must play the man and have real courage in this hour to preach the gospel. Look at the Democratic Party of the year 2020. Kamala Harris, Bernie Sanders, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Mike Bloomberg, who's financing them with untold wealth. You know what they're presenting as a party? And believe me, if Trump is finished in the White House and Biden is coming in, this is a vital part of the Great Reset. The Great Reset is on track, and it's very important what happens in this election. Biden has already promised a new COVID action plan. My American friends, get ready. They are going to implement many things that they've managed to elsewhere that some of you have managed to escape. They're going to move forward on abortion. They'll open the gates to immigration. They're going to be 100% behind climate change. Their attitude to Israel is going to change. They'll rejoin the Iran nuclear deal. They'll boost support to NATO. They'll turn sour on Saudi Arabia, who is one of the main countries that stands for Israel in the coming Ezekiel's war that we're getting very close to. They're going to rejoin the Paris Climate Accord that Trump took America out of. that was signed in December 2016, just 4 years ago. They're going to rejoin WHO. And Biden is going to promote the new Green Deal, a green economy, just like Britain. These two states of Great Britain and America for 4 years have been patriotic, going back to the people, regaining their freedoms. And now, in one foul swoop, these two great nations are being caught up in the Green Deal. What is the Green Deal? It is the Great Reset, or the beginning of the fourth industrial revolution. It's a green economy, a radical UN proposal to eliminate all fossil fuels in just 10 years, to impose a new socialist program on the economy of these nations as well as the nations of the world. You see, the Great Reset plan is for the global economy. And do you know what it is? It is the Green New Deal on steroids, as people have said. What about Biden's campaign? Just last night I saw in the news that Biden has appointed John Kerry to stand beside him to be the special presidential envoy for climate for America. This is what he's going to bring in, this whole new agenda. And really hidden within this Trojan horse is old-fashioned socialism. John Kerry, for a long time now, has spoken about Build Back Better. It is his brand, along with many others. He's very close to Biden, and in fact their children went into business together. He is called the climate czar, and he's a big believer in the green economy. But you know what? Kerry is also a good friend of the World Economic Forum and a supporter of the Great Reset. Friends, the BBC and all these newspapers like the New York Times can mock people like me and call us conspiracy theorists. I'm giving you facts in this video, and I'm only touching the surface of it. Listen to what John Kerry actually said, quote, "This is a big moment," speaking about this year. "The World Economic Forum is really going to have to play a front and center role in defining the Great Reset with climate change and inequality, all of which is being laid as a consequence of COVID-19. What about Biden's good friend Al Gore? Oh yes, he's a good friend of Biden, and he's working in the background of this. Do you know Al Gore is on the board of directors? He's a member of the World Economic Forum. You see, Biden's going to bring in higher tax and push big business out of America. Again, that's what they want. There's going to be a loss of privacy and much more. In fact, Biden began back in 2017, the Biden Institute, putting his own name on it to train leaders for a new agenda. In 2017, when he launched it, in the main speech, this is what they said. They would not model the activities of the Biden Institute after the World Economic Forum. In the following week, after the launch of his Biden Institute, he met that week with Klaus Schwab of the World Economic Forum in order to develop a plan together how to go forward. Also, Biden, in case you don't know, he spoke at Davos in 2016 and 2017 as vice president to Obama in 2016, also accompanied by Kerry. And who knows, maybe he'll be the key speaker at the Davos convention next year. I think it's very likely. You see, I'm talking about the rise of socialism in Great Britain, in Australia, in the nations of the world, in America. There is a grand takeover coming, and I'm giving you exact quotes, Klaus Schwab of the World Economic Forum. This Great Reset is the merger of socialism and capitalism. I have to emphasize it, lest someone tells you it's not true. I'm quoting, and you can find it. What is socialism? It was created by Karl Marx, that German who died in England with only 11 people at his funeral. And yet within 100 years, The map of the world was painted red. Red is always the symbol of socialism and communism. His form of socialism was actually called communism. So you see that Marxism, socialism, and communism, they're all interconnected. They're distinct, but they all come out of the same source. You see, Marx was an economist. And please remember, capitalism is an economic system. Socialism is an economic system. All of these are an economic system. What is socialism? It is an economic philosophy advocating public rather than private ownership. It attacks private ownership of business, of home, and of wealth, especially of the means of production, distribution, and the exchange of goods. In other words, making money. Socialism has always failed everywhere it's gone, and we don't have time to go through that. More government control, and they target the youth and the universities. Now, socialism in America, it is being repackaged. It's called democratic socialism. But you listen to them. They do talk about the end of private property. Property, sorry. And they also talk about progressive capitalism. Please understand all these terms. You've got to understand a few of these terms so you know that when they speak, what they're actually saying. Klaus Schwab in his book also talks about rewriting the social contract of nations and of governments. This is fundamental to what nations are. What is a social contract? It is the term that is used, and again, most of us don't even know these terms. It is the term that is used on how to organize each one of our societies. It is a covenant, a compact between the government and the people, or the rulers and those who are ruled. Let me finish here. I've got so much to say, but I can't cover it all in this video, I'm afraid. Let me take you back to the source and the founding of socialism as we know it in our world over the past 300 to 400 years. And I take you back as we close to the French Revolution. Just prior to the French Revolution, there were certain French philosophers who wrote books, who gave talks, who created the ideology that created the French Revolution, which was pure, old-fashioned socialism. Listen carefully as we close. One of these men, Abe St. Pierre, wrote a book called The Plan for Perpetual Peace in 1717. In that book, he lays out a plan for bringing about world peace by doing away with sovereign nation states through creating a federation of nations. Do you hear what I'm saying? First in Europe, then in the world, by signing treaties and contracts or covenants or new social contracts, as well as by international law, having a united international law for all nations. What he said in this book, and this was the French philosopher that would affect the entire French Revolution, he said, we will propose this plan, then we will enforce it. He said, patriotism will be crushed by a heavy-handed police force. He gave lectures in Paris, and men like Voltaire attended them. He was setting forth this vision of a worldwide socialist government that all nations would be a part of. Another French philosopher who actually sat under his teachings for 2 years was called Jean-Jacques Rousseau. Listen about him. He became gripped with the vision of world peace accomplished by a world federation, and he republished Pierre's book, The Plan for Perpetual Peace, in 1761. He also wrote a book called The Social Contract in 1762 on a similar theme, stating that the ownership of private property was the main cause of all disputes and all wars. These French philosophers, just before the French Revolution, affected men like Adam Weishaupt in Bavaria in Germany, and also Nicolas Bonneville in France. Listen carefully here as I try to bring this to a close. Bonneville actually began to preach in the Revolution about a worldwide republic, worldwide revolution, a universal federation of nations. You want to know what the French Revolution was? This is what it was. It was never meant to be contained to France. It was to go global. It's all about world government. And it has never died. They still read these books. Listen to what Bonneville said, how it would come about. Through a slow process, over many generations, using democracy, they're going to bring in their plan for a worldwide revolution and a worldwide republic. He said that they would bring about an agrarian law, which means the redistribution of goods and lands for the common good of all people. It was to be the Federation of Nations. It would finally destroy Christianity. He says, we tolerate Christianity now, but finally we'll destroy it. One man who was a good friend of Bonneville was Thomas Paine. He was an Englishman who actually tried to jump in upon the American Revolution, and yet he opposed George Washington and called Washington an apostate. I believe Thomas Paine was an illuminist. I've got no doubt about that. I also believe Jefferson knew exactly what was going on, and that Jefferson was affected by these French revolutionary ideas. George Washington wasn't. Another leader in the French Revolution was Gracchus Babeuf, and a book was written about his conspiracy called The Conspiracy of Equals by another man called Buonarroti, who was the father of communism. This book, The Conspiracy of Equals, that contained the ideal of the French Revolution, socialism, that I've just stated here, of a world revolution, was contained in this book. Do you know who devoured it? Karl Marx. Marxism and communism and socialism did not begin with Karl Marx, but he read it in this book, all about the French Revolution, how to bring revolution to a nation and the world. And in fact, Karl Marx then promoted it and used it, and it affected our world. Do you know that the novel about Frankenstein is all about the French Revolution? It's a parable. The man who wrote Frankenstein read all about the secret societies who brought about the French Revolution. Many revolutions took place in the 19th century and into the beginning of the 20th century. At the beginning of the 20th century, and I'm allowed 3 finalies. My church always allows me 3 finalies in our meetings, so please, you bear with me. This is longer than I wanted it, but I've got so much, and I'd miss out so much important information if I didn't. I'm so sorry about that. But listen, at the beginning of 20th century in Britain, you say, what's all this got to do with Biden and with Boris? And what's it got to do with the French Revolution? Listen closely as I finally do close. At the beginning of the 20th century, I want to take you there to a group of men, 13 in number, meeting in a secret gathering for a period of 6 years, that had all this ideology of the French Revolution that I believe it's just about to come to bear now through the Great Reset. I'll just choose one of those 13 men to show you the importance of the influence of all this. His name was H.G. Wells. He was a novelist, a writer of novels. He wrote The Invisible Man. Some of you will know that. He also wrote The War of the Worlds and is called the father of science fiction. In the 1880s in England, he was a Fabian and also a socialist. In 1902, when he began to meet with these 13 men in this band of brothers, there were English lords, top politicians, socialists, Fabians, Also, leaders of secret societies. Milliner was the main man in there. And also authors like Wells. They met together and they shared their vision together during those 6 years. A vision of a worldwide state. Now, in Wells' books from 1900 to 1944, he speaks in all of his books about world government, a world republic, a world state, brought about by a world revolution. He called his plan the open conspiracy, or the new world order. He promoted things like controlled society, the death of democracy. He was accused of being a Marxist world statesman. But in 1905, in some of his books, he was talking about an energy currency, utopia, how a state would be created where the sole landowner would be the state or the government. He was promoting ideas of an undemocratic one-party state. He talked about state ownership of property and business, and that the state should educate the children and the young people in the universities. He talked about enforcing equal citizenship upon all, free love, a world state, and much else. His constant theme was a call to radical socialism. And in fact, he believed in acting, that these governments should act against the better wish of multitudes for the supposed good of all. He talked about unifying politics with social life and with the economics of the world, to join it all together. And he also talked about replacing socialism and communism with this new created world state. In 1916, he authored a book under an alias name. And the man who wrote the foreword of it was Milliner, one of the most important politicians of the wartime and the end of the war. In that book in 1916, he spoke about the need for a world body called the League of Nations. 3 years later, in 1919, he released a book called The League of Nations with other English lords and politicians. They wrote it together. We need a League of Nations. The plan was to have a world state at the end of the First World War. And in fact, the men involved in writing that book, 1919, they created the League of Nations at the end of the First World War, and America rejected it. Your president at the time was a globalist who wanted to take you into a world government. But the American people stood against it and rejected it. The men who created this ideology over the next 2 decades created and financed the ecumenical movement that affected the church, and also many other political institutions in Britain and in America. You see, H.G. Wells had a good friend and associate called Huxley, who was very inspired by the writings of Wells, and he published his tongue-in-cheek book in 1932, listen, called The Brave New World. The Brave New World that he published, which had all the ideology of Wells, was a futuristic novel set in London. It portrays the world state made up of 10 regional, worldwide regions, headed up by 10 world controllers. And he concentrates in that novel or that book on a unified Western Europe as being one of those 10 zones. In response to Wells and Huxley's books, George Orwell in 1948 wrote his book 1984, an exposure of all of their socialist agenda. Friends, I'm telling you in this video, the World Economic Forum and its plan to bring about the Great Reset in the Western world and in the entire world is an economic change, a change and a rewriting of the social contract, a change of capitalism, and all of this to bring in a new political system. Do you know what this is? This is Daniel chapter 2. Listen as I close. And it says in Daniel 2:42, and as the toes of the feet We're part of iron, part of clay, so the kingdom shall be partly strong and partly broken. Verse 43, and whereas thou sawest the iron mixed with marry clay, they shall mingle themselves with the seed of men, but they shall not cleave one to another, even as iron is not mixed with clay. In Daniel 2, all of the different metals represent different forms of government. The iron represents the old imperial Rome, that type of government. The clay represents modern democracy. And what Daniel is saying here, the 10 toes, which aren't 10 nations, the 10 kings of Revelation and Daniel are not 10 kings. Sorry, they're not 10 nations. They are 10 kings. I believe our entire world is going to be globalized, regionalized into 10 regions with 10 kings overseeing it. And I believe it's going to be the convergence of socialism with capitalism. And out of a new economic system, there's going to be the rise of a world government. And when those 10 leaders are in place, the scene is set for a little horn, a world leader that is insignificant, who's going to be possessed by the devil, is going to rise up in this hour. Friends, I've got thousands of audio messages and hundreds of YouTube videos up teaching the scripture. And I've had to hold back in these. I'm just presenting to you what's happening in our world. Go listen to those messages or buy my book, The Scarlet Woman. All the information I'm giving you is in this, The Scarlet Woman, and it'll show you what has been happening for hundreds of years, how it fulfills Bible prophecy, and where we are. I'm going to come back and give you part 4 and just show you what all the separate elements of the 4th Industrial Revolution, what is going to mark the 2020s, what is their plan in every area of society, and how we as believers are going to respond to it. Thank you for your emails, your contact, your prayers. Keep praying for me. And we want to preach the gospel, reach souls in the midst of this. That's our agenda. I love Jesus Christ with all my heart. He saved me, forgave my sins. You must be born again. In the light of all this, you must believe in the Lord Jesus Christ for the remission of your sins. God bless you.